Now, it isn't just personality that this course is about. People tend to think of personality as something that's relatively fixed and stable, because if it was fluctuating completely all over the potential range of personality, there wouldn't be a lot of utility in discussing it. But it is stable, so that you are who you are, but it's also amenable to change. Now, it's difficult to change your personality. It's as if, in some sense, that the dice was rolled, or 5 sets of dice, as it turns out, were rolled at the point where you were born, and you were granted a particular kind of personality configuration, on the off chance that that configuration could find its proper niche in the environment. It's sort of like, people have more or less settled on a 5-dimensional personality model, which we'll talk about a lot in the last half of the course. But the idea seems to be that, perhaps, is that the environment that you inhabit, which is largely social, right? It's not just physical, it's mostly social, because you're like hyper-social primates. Some of you are probably checking your email right now. It's as if there are niches within that space that may or may not be there, or may not predominate, and the dice rolls, when you're conceived and you're given a set of attributes, and with any luck you can find a niche in the broader social and physical environment where your particular set of attributes is going to be functional for you. And so a lot of, and this is something to think about too, we'll try to get into this in some depth in the class, a lot of what you need to do to make your life at least tolerable is to figure out what your personality attributes are, and then to find a niche where they're valued. So, for example, for those of you that are creative, you probably know who you are. It's actually a rare trait, by the way. I wouldn't recommend banking or law, because law and banking, just to take 2 examples, are very conservative enterprises. We tested the 100 most creative lawyers in Canada at one point. They were nominated by their firms, and the most outstanding personality attribute of the 100 most creative lawyers was not openness, it wasn't creativity, it was conscientiousness, even though they were the 100 most creative lawyers. And of course, law depends on precedent. I mean, how creative do you want your lawyer to be? You know, if your lawyer's creative enough, then you'll be in jail, so that's probably not, you know, it's not the greatest idea. So it's very useful to get a handle on what your personality is, because then you can take a look at the potential environments that lie in front of you and hopefully match yourself to one of them. Now, that's a tricky business, you know, because it isn't necessarily the case that the niche that you're most suitable to inhabit is one that's stable or economically viable, you know. So, for example, I think in some ways it's become more difficult, for example, to monetize a variety of different creative productions. So it's harder to monetize music, for example, because of course it can be shared for nothing. So, you know, it's luck of the draw to some degree. So, now, the other part of the course is the transformation element. Now, you know, personality is stable, so if you test a person at one time and you test a person later, then there's high correlations between the 2 sets of tests, but there's also variability. And the variability is the part that contains the potential, so to speak, for transformation. So you're an entity with quasi-fixed attributes, but that doesn't mean that you can't transform and learn. You know, you're sort of this weird balance between stability and plasticity, which actually happen to be 2 meta traits of personality. And I also want to take you through the process of understanding what personality transformation is and how to conceptualize it, because personality transformation comes at a cost, and the cost seems to be, with each incremental change, there is an equal increment of instability. You know, so that's often because you learn things painfully, right? I mean, if you learn something, if it's something you expect and something you want, there's no learning there, generally speaking, because you expect it, so it means you already know about it, and you want it, so it's good. The most potent learning experiences tend to occur when something occurs within the realm of your experience that you don't expect, and often that you don't want. And those are the sorts of things that destabilize your personality. Now, they can also be the sort of things that eventually expand it, because if you encounter something that you don't understand, that means that there's information in the event that you haven't incorporated within your own being. And if you can do that, then at least in principle, then your dominion of competence can expand. mean, I assume that most of you want to be better people. Now, your definition of what might constitute better is going to differ again according to your temperament, but generally speaking, it seems that people are, they're like Sisyphus, they're uphill climbers. You know, you don't want to go from bad to worse, you want to go from where you are to better, and that means that you have to conceptualize what constitutes better, and that makes personality theory, at least in regard to its clinical domain, a very strange hybrid of science and engineering, because, you know, generally science doesn't deal with values, but if you're dealing with human personality, it seems impossible to avoid the topic, especially if you're concerned with something like mental health. So, you know, you can assume that mental health means normal, but most of you don't assume that, right? Because, you know, if you want your reach to exceed your grasp, a lot of you are going to be aiming for something that's better than normal, or better than average, let's say. We don't consider average optimal, and that's a strange thing. So, the first half of the course that deals with the clinicians is going to take us into the realm of personality transformation, and also necessarily lead us through a discussion of value, because I can't see that there's any avoiding it. Also, I think it would be ridiculous to avoid it, because why you should do things is, you know, how you conceptualize why you should do things is an extraordinarily integral part of your personality. I mean, one of the things that we found recently, it's a variant of an exercise that I'm going to have you do in this class, is that if you get people to spend a couple of hours writing down their vision of the future, you know, so the question basically is, all right, so imagine yourself now imagine yourself 3 to 5 years in the future. Okay, now, and here's the rules. Imagine that you're trying to take care of yourself like you would take care of someone that you cared about. It's a strange framing, but, you know, people often don't take care of themselves as well as they take care of other people. You know, they're hard on themselves and they denigrate themselves because, you know, you might be painfully aware of all your multiple inadequacies. And of course, inadequacies are part of the human condition. So it's easy, if you've become cognizant of your inadequacies, to also denigrate the value of your being and not take care of yourself, and that's not a good thing. I mean, flawed as you are, you're probably no worse than anyone else, and if things shouldn't be good for you, then the logical conclusion is that things shouldn't be good for anyone else either. So, you know, you start with yourself and assume that you deserve some, at least the basic elements of the attitude that you would give to someone that you care for. Okay, so you put yourself in that mind frame. Now you think 3 to 5 years down the road. What do you want for friendship? What do you want for career? What do you want for family? How do you want your intimate relationships to be constituted? What are you going to do when you're not working? What sort of productive and useful activities and interesting activities are you going to engage in? If you could optimize your life 3 to 5 years down the road, what exactly would that look like? All right, so there's that question. Then we also get people to answer the reverse question, which is, all right, now imagine that you allow your inadequacies and your pathologies, such as they are, to gain the upper hand, which I'm sure they do in your own lives on a week-to-week basis. Imagine you really let them get out of hand. So, you know, you're drinking 26 ounces of vodka every second day in 5 years, or, you know, you're lying uncontrollably, or no one can stand you because you're too disagreeable and neurotic, or whatever. You know whatever your weaknesses happen to be. Maybe you procrastinate all the time and you end up unemployed. Imagine 3 to 5 years down the road that things turn out as badly for you as they can because you've allowed things to go from bad to worse, and conceptualize that. Well, and then we have people write a plan based on the positive vision. The negative vision, I think, is really useful because if you're running towards something, it's also extremely useful from a motivational perspective to be running away from something at the same time. You know, then you can harness your positive emotions, which are associated with approaching a valued goal, and you can have your negative emotions like fear chasing you instead of standing in front of you, interfering with your progress.